Hey friends, time for another chapter of Facing West. Again, you're going to want to be taking notes on this information or on this chapter because it's something that you can include in your writing to make your writing realistic. There's a lot of friends that have already started, as I'm seeing looking at your journals, that have already started taking what they're hearing in Facing West and putting it into their own journals. Remember, in your journals, you can also include your research that you did during investigations. You can include anything that you have heard during a writing lesson or any of your investigations. Those are great things to make sure that you're including. And just as a gentle reminder, your journal should follow the outline of your timeline that you did a few lessons ago. So just all things to keep in mind. The last chapter we read, we met our main character and started our journey. And now we're going to continue that journey, and this chapter is called Adventure. May 10th, 1845, Ben wrote. He stared... Oh, really quickly, as I read, I'm going to stop and just make some noticings. And I noticed that, Ben, our main character, is writing a journal just like we are, and I know I mentioned that last time. But what's great about this is that you can get little pointers on how a journal should sound as I'm reading. So you might notice, hey, May 10th, 1845, that's a really specific date. He didn't just write month 1, week 1. He wrote an actual date. And I noticed some of us haven't been writing dates in our journals, so please make sure you're writing an actual date. May 10th, 1845, Ben wrote. He stared into the breakfast fire, then added, the same as yesterday, and the day before, and the day before that. 1 whole month on the Oregon Trail and nothing had changed. The sky, the land, the chores, the people, the endless walking were always the same. Even if he liked writing, there wouldn't be any more to write about. He threw his pencil down and climbed the wagon wheel to look back over the prairie. What do you see? Zach climbed up beside him and leaned against the dusty gray canvas. Remember, Zach's his friend that we met in our last chapter. Aren't those fire circles where they camped yesterday? Ben pointed to the back of the cattle grazing on the hot morning sun. Zach nodded. How can you walk 18 long miles, Ben complained, and not seem to get anywhere? Isn't it grand? Oh, sorry, let me go. Aren't those fire circles where we camped yesterday? Ben pointed far back over the cattle grazing in the hot morning sun. Zach nodded. How can you walk 18 long miles, Ben complained. Are you not, and not seem to go anywhere? Isn't it grand? Zach said. Ben was silent. He hadn't thought of it that way. Look, just look at the wagons. Chains of white wagon covers strung across the prairie behind them, shining in the sun. Now, when they refer to wagon trains, I don't know if you came across this in your research, but they don't actually mean a train, trains like Sammy likes. They're talking about a train like when more than one wagon is following. That's called a wagon train. So when there could be like 30, 40, 50 wagon trains. One wagon train, 30, 40 wagons in the wagon train. I like being the very last wagon of the train, Ben said. It seems like I'm closer to home. He thought about the big oak outside his bedroom window, about how he used to climb it to sneak in and out of the house before the trip. You're wrong, Zach said. In 2 months, you'll be at the front of the train again. Then you'll be closer to home, your new home. Ben jumped down. Let's do something, he said. Zach grinned. He put his finger to his lips and crawled under the wagon. He lay down in the tall grass and crawled toward the rise. Where are you going? Ben whispered. Zach just shook his head and kept crawling. Ben followed, ready for adventure. Those scouting skills, boys. It was Pete, standing quietly beside his horse. His face looked serious, and suddenly he was smiling. Ben let his breath out. The boys wiggled back to the rise and stood. They grinned, then giggled, then laughed, and Ben felt his chest get tight. Finally, Pete coughed, and they were quiet again. Ben, Pete asked, are you having trouble here making trouble here in the back of the train? No, sir, Ben asked. Trouble here? Pete nodded and looked at the sun. You might today. It's going to be a hot one. I'll be back to see you later. Pete mounted his horse and rode off. A friend of his? Zach's surprise showed in his voice. No. He talks to my mama sometimes, but I don't think he likes people much. Seems that way. He always rides away before noon. He never sits by anybody's campfire in the night. Nobody knows where he goes. He said he said some strange things to me the first day of the trip. Ben remembered the nightmares he'd had about the bears and the snakes and the elephants in his bed. He smells bad too, Zach said, but he can sure ride. They watched Pete gallop out along the trail. His Pinto was a small horse, but strong. He had to be strong, Ben thought, the way that Pete rode him. Oh. Wouldn't you love to push ahead of everybody like that? He asked Zach. Let's roll, the train's captain, Mr. Tyler, called. Zach ran to his own wagon. The women came back from the morning walk through the grasses. Ben looked at the ground. He felt the blood rush to his cheeks. He hurried and put out the morning fire, then called, Becky! Those were his chores, and the fire Those were his chores, the fire and his little sister. It was a stupid work for a boy, but it was all Mama would let him do. He threw the leftover twigs and the dry cow droppings into the blanket hanging under the wagon. They'd burn them in the noon fire. Pa argued the oxen back into their places, and the family faced west. The big wheels turned with a screech, and the harnesses jingled. The children began the day's march. I'm tired, Becky said as they started. Come on now. Ben took her hand. Today's walk will be easy. But it wasn't. Before an hour had passed, the sun dried the soil to dust. The iron-clad wheels of 59 wagons crushed the dry grasses to a powder. Clouds of dust hung in the air by the time the Clark's wagon finally passed. Carry me, Becky begged. Ben didn't answer. He couldn't. The dust made his throat hurt. His chest felt tight and sore, and a tickle was testing his deep inside. Don't start coughing, Ben told himself. Just don't start. The dust filled his nose and coated his tongue. Ben began to lose his place. Oh no, sorry. Ben began breathing in short little breaths. He wanted to fill his lungs, but he couldn't pull the air in. He couldn't move the old air out either. These short little breaths got faster, and they made a whistling sound. He needed more air. Carry me, Ben, Becky pleaded. No, Ben spoke quickly. Not now. He tried not to cough, but it was starting. He could feel it coming. He coughed once to stop the tickle, and then he couldn't stop. Get me some water, Becky said. I'm hot. Ben fought the breath. Oh, sorry, that's not what it says. Ben fought to breathe. The harder he coughed, the less air he got, and the more scared he was. His face felt cold, and he was getting dizzy. Air. He needed air. Mama, he heard Becky yell. Ben's face is all white. Pa ran to help Ben into the wagon. Ben sat beside Mama and on the wooden seat, coughing and coughing. Just relax, Mama said. Relax. Ben fought for air. He couldn't breathe. Give the bear cub to me, he heard Pete's voice from a distance. I'll ride out of the dust. Ben felt Pa's hands under his arms. He was being lifted. Sorry, sentence broke. Then he was on Pete's horse. Ben was coughing and coughing. Under him, the horse was galloping. He closed his eyes and leaned back against Pete's chest. He started breathing in time with the horse's hooves. Then it was easier. And then he could breathe more deeply. When he opened his eyes, the wagons and the dust were gone. The horse was rushing across the prairie, and the clean, sweet air was coming into Ben's lungs. He tried to take a deep breath and started coughing again. Whoa, Pete said. His horse slowed. Try this, Ben. Pete coughed twice in a row. Ben felt his coughs with his whole body. They were deep and sharp. Pete waited a minute. Then he coughed twice and waited. Did it again. The first cough loosens it up, he said as the Pinto walked along. The second one gets it out. You can spit or swallow, doesn't matter to me. Ben tried. How did you know to do that? He asked, when he could get his breath. I had asthma too, when I was a cub. It's pretty near gone now, but I still can't stand the dust of the wagon train. Ben remembered seeing him ride away every day. It's not just dust, is it? It's smoke too. It's why you have to stay away from campfires, isn't it? Smoke used to trigger the asthma for me. Buffalo chip smoke especially. Happens now and often as it snows in July. I thought it only got worse. I thought it would just happen to me over and over and over again. Forever. Ben could feel the sting of tears behind his eyes and the sick tightness growing behind his chest. So let's stop here for a second. The author mentions that it happens as often as snow in July. Well, we know that here, at least in New York, snow doesn't happen pretty often in July. So our older character here, Pete, is just sharing with Ben, our younger character, how he no longer has to suffer so much from his asthma attacks because he's gotten some ways to deal with it. He rides away. We're now learning he rides away from the campfire, which everyone else finds weird because he's not sitting around campfires with people every night by their wagons. But now we know why. And he rides out during the day away from the wagon train, and he leads the wagon train, and people find that weird, but now we know why. You can do this too in your journals if you want to include something that your character does but not really reveal why, and then later you can reveal it. I think that's a really cool thing that authors can include into their writing to make it really suspenseful and interesting. Maybe it will and maybe it won't. Don't borrow tomorrow's troubles, Cub. It only muddies up today. Muddy, Ben thought. He liked that picture. That was exactly what his days had been like. Muddy. Having asthma was like having a walk in deep mud all the time. You just stay upwind of fire, you hear? Pete said, and I'll come get you on dusty days. He pulled his horse to a stop along the rise. Now, look yonder. A river wandered wide and flat and brown below them. That's the Platte. Ben whistled. We really are getting somewhere. Okay, that's it for today. See you next time. Our next chapter is called Indian Attacks. So if you need to go back and rewatch this video and think about what things did you hear today that you would like to include in your writing. And I'll see you next time, friends. Good luck with your journal writing.